The Springboks will play Italy in July 2025 by the looks of things, and this is very significant. In this video, I will share with you the details and also give you 3 reasons why we should all be very excited about this as you get a front row seat to the Springboks' 2025 opponents before the Rugby Championship. Now, the reason that this is of particular interest is because in 2025 the British and Irish Lions will be touring Australia. That effectively rules out England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland as opponents for the Springboks before the championship. Now, every year in July, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand and Argentina host teams from the Northern Hemisphere, and obviously the likes of Ireland and England and even France to an extent are what you would call high-profile opponents, and that obviously generates more income for the respective national federations. Obviously, it's a little bit more valuable than hosting, say, Romania or Georgia, for example. But in a year when the Lions are touring, as will be the case in 2025, there is a clamour usually to try and get France as your opponents because they would be the most high-profile opponent that you can get. But there's a little bit of a snag from a South African perspective because in 2025, the French will be touring New Zealand. But similarly, there's a little bit of a catch there because the French have already announced that they will be treating their July tours going forward, at least for the foreseeable future, as experimental and development tours. That means that the French team that will be going to New Zealand in 2025 will not feature players like Antoine Dupont, Francois Cros, Emile Ntamak, or Gregory Aldrit. I hope I've pronounced those names correctly. My French pronunciations are usually terrible. But New Zealand might be feeling that maybe they've got a bit of a raw deal here, given that the French are not going to be sending their best players. In a way, you might say that South Africa has actually dodged a bullet here. And what it does mean is that the most high-profile team remaining in terms of available choices would be Italy. Before I go further, let's take a look at the history of who toured South Africa during British and Irish Lions series when we were not hosting the Lions. In 1993, France were here for 2 tests, but that was still the amateur era. We drew the first test, Francois Pienaar's first as captain, and then lost the second 18-17. In 97, we hosted the Lions. In 2001, France were here again, and we drew the series 1-1 before facing Italy in a one-off test. In 2005, once more, the French were in town. We drew the first test and won the second. Uruguay were our opponents before that contest. In 2009, the Lions toured SA. And then in 2013, Les Bleus visited the land of the long white cloud. So we hosted a strange 4 nations competition featuring the Italians as well as Scotland and Samoa. Now, you might ask me, how on earth were the Scots part of that 4 nations competition in a Lions year when obviously the British and Irish were in Australia in 2013? Well, the truth is that there weren't many Scotsmen that were part of that Lions touring party, and that is how it came to be that Scotland were able to field something of a competitive team to tour South Africa. Then in 2017, France were again the Springboks opponent, and we hammered them 3-0, and 4 years later, the Lions were again in South Africa. So you can see we've actually hosted France quite a number of times since readmission during British and Irish Lions tours, the years in which they tour Australia and New Zealand. But given that they are no longer sending their best players on these July tours, I think that maybe they are less than the attractive option that they once were. And so that brings me to the Italians. Should we be excited about them coming to South Africa? Well, yes, and here's 3 reasons why. Number 1, regardless of who the Springboks are playing, it's still an opportunity for us, the fans, to go to the stadium and cheer on our World Cup winning heroes. The fact that we're not playing the All Blacks, which, let's be honest, that can't happen every week, shouldn't be a deterrent. It's not really about who we're playing as much as it is a case of us going to the stadium and seeing our boys in action. Number 2, the Azzurri are improving all the time. Yes, I still expect us to win the series somewhat comfortably, but these guys are very much on the rise. I know they had a shocker at the World Cup last year, but if you look at what they did in the 6 Nations, it is very clear that this is a team that is improving, and the many years of the Italians making up the numbers in that tournament appear to finally be over. We dare not underestimate them. And number 3, it seems as if these 2 tests against Italy will take place on the 5th and the 12th of July. What's exciting about that, you may ask? Well, let me tell you something from a very personal perspective. The 12th of July happens to be my birthday. And if it has happened to you, you will know that it is always very exciting when the Springboks are in action on your birthday. In my case, it's actually happened twice before. In 2003, Brent Russell tore Australia apart at Newlands in the Tri-Nations, and we won that match. And then in 2008, Ricky January scored a beautiful try right at the end as the Springboks beat the All Blacks in Dunedin for the first time ever. You can just imagine my levels of excitement. And for that reason, Brent Russell and Ricky January will forever be very, very special people and significant figures in my life. Now, the report of Italy coming to tour South Africa has not actually been confirmed yet. We are speculating, but it was something that featured in the Report newspaper last week. And I think that it's fair to say that Report is a very credible source. And time for a little bit of an in-joke, if you don't mind. If, like me, you grew up in the northern suburbs of Cape Town, you'll be very familiar with the sounds of a newspaper salesman, usually on his bicycle, coming down your street on a Sunday morning shouting, "Here's the report!" My dad actually used to buy the Report for us every Sunday, as well as the Sunday Argus. And yes, I mostly only read the sports articles, but what it did do for me was help me to improve my language skills and reading skills in both languages. And of course, we have an excellent record against Italy. We've won 15 of our 16 tests against the Azzurri. Now that covers 2 of the 3 tests that the Boks will play in July, and that leaves a very important question. Who will be our opponents in the 3rd test? Because remember, we do play 3 tests every July. In fact, you might say a minimum of 3 tests. For example, this year, before those July test matches, we played the Qatar Airways Cup match. That was at Twickenham against Wales. The year before, we played against the All Blacks, and we won both of those Qatar Airways matches. And I'm suspecting that Saru will look to arrange something similar again next year, but we'll have to wait and see. Now, in terms of that 3rd test match this year in July, Portugal were in town. And yes, it was a big celebration. It was very cool to see the Portuguese in South Africa. They thrilled us at the Rugby World Cup in 2023. But could they be coming again in 2025? Well, I would say maybe, but I have a feeling that we might be lining up Georgia as our opponents in that 3rd test match. Now, why do I say that? Well, there's a couple of things. Firstly, in 2021, when we returned to rugby after not playing in 2020 because of COVID, we actually played 2 tests against Georgia before the British and Irish Lions series. But because of COVID infecting the Georgian team, we were actually only able to play 1 of those 2 test matches. And I've got a funny feeling that Saru and Georgia might be looking to find a way to actually play that 2nd test match, even though in this case it will be 4 years down the line. I also think it'll be a really nice gesture from South Africa to the Georgians. And we've already set the precedent in 2024 for being open to playing test matches against what we would call Tier 2 nations. Portugal this year. How about Georgia next year? I think it'll be a really, really nice statement from the world champions to say, hey, you know what? We don't mind playing against so-called smaller nations, and it might actually help some of the other big teams, Australia, New Zealand, maybe Argentina, England, France, Ireland, etc., to also play more test matches against these so-called smaller sides. I actually think that it would be a great way to help grow the sport globally. And I've actually raised this point before. I think that it would be great if World Rugby mandated a test match against a lower tier opponent every year for each of the top teams. And then you could even say further to that, the Tier 2 teams should be mandated to play against a Tier 3 team, and so on and so forth. Now, further to all of that, that potential 3rd test against Georgia, or whoever it may be against, will also be a wonderful opportunity for Rassie Erasmus to blood new players if he so chooses. He made many changes for the Portugal test match this year in Bloemfontein, and I think it's a great way for Springboks to build up experience, but also maybe make their debuts against teams that are not New Zealand, for example. I'm not a big fan of making your debut against the All Blacks. I just think there's a better way to ease your way and blood your way into international rugby. But I'd like to know what you think. Who do you think we should play in that third test match in 2025 after we've played 2 tests against Italy? Should it be Georgia? Maybe you've got somebody else in mind. Let me know in the comment section. And while you're down there, you can have a look for a button that has a heart with a $sign inside of it. If you don't see it, there's another button with 3 dots inside. If you click on that, you will see the heart with the $sign inside of it. That is the super thanks button. That will allow you to make a highlighted comment. You will also be guaranteed a reply from me. I will also click the heart button on your comment, and you will be invited to make a small donation to my channel. Why do I want you to make a donation? Well, guys, I would love to go to the Rugby World Cup for you in 2027 and provide you with daily content from Down Under during the tournament. But I'm going to need a little bit of assistance to get myself there, and that's where you come in. I would very much appreciate any kind of support. Having said that, other ways that you can support me, you can just hit the like button or spear tackle it or even croc roll the like button if you so choose. And you can also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Now, just before you go, let me tell you, we were speaking about the Italians, and back in 1999, Corne Krige made his Springbok debut against them. He also captained the team on that occasion when we won 101-0. Corne sat down with me for an exclusive interview about his Springbok career, including that encounter against the Italians, as well as Kamp Staaldraad and the 2003 World Cup. You can watch that video. It's over here. And further to that, I also did an interview with Brent Russell. I mentioned him earlier in this video. He talks about his career over here in this video, and I will see you next time.